Hi, everybody. I'm going to kick us off. Good afternoon. Hope everybody is well. My name is Katie Jacobs from the CIPD, and I've been hosting our coronavirus series of webinars. So we've just been spending the last 5 minutes in a bit of a pre-show, I wouldn't call it a panic, discussion, because obviously we were planning to have this, this conversation and do this webinar about the recent changes to policy that have come along, but in my original intro, I wrote that an awful lot has happened in the last week or so. Now I have to amend that and say an awful lot has happened in the last 10 minutes. So HR professionals could be excused, as could anyone, including us, for feeling a little bit lost and confused. But in this session, we're going to attempt to clear some things up for you that we know. We're going to talk about the various government schemes and interventions for employers that have been announced or potentially, we could say, re-announced in recent weeks or even minutes. So as I'm sure quite a few of you know, the Chancellor has just announced that the furlough scheme will be extended to the end of March. And we're still awaiting details on that and what it means for the job support scheme. But we will answer any questions that we can, and we will give as much insight as we can. And we are going to do a couple of presentations and take questions. So joining me this afternoon, I've got two experts that have spoken about this topic multiple times over the last kind of 6 or 7 months. So hopefully are as well informed as anybody can be on the changing landscape. I'm joined by Ben Willmott. Ben is Head of Public Policy at the CIPD, and Andrew Willis. Andrew is Head of Legal and Advisory at HR Inform, which is the CIPD's employment law resource. Thank you both for coming along this afternoon. As ever, I'm just going to run through some quick housekeeping. The session is being recorded. You will be able to access it afterwards on demand, and the slides will also be available, so you will be able to download them from the CIPD website. If you would like to submit questions during the webinar, and please do, please can you use the Q&A tab, and you should be able to see the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you want me to put questions to Ben and Andrew, please put them into the Q&A. If you want to chat among yourselves or make any points, then feel free to use the chat function for that. Remember that the CIPD Coronavirus Hub is there for you as a resource, and that we are adding things to it all the time, and I'm sure we will have updated information on the extension to furlough in the next few hours. For legal advice, I want to remind you that CIPD members can call our HR Inform helpline. It's available 24/7, and you'll get an individual response. So if you have a question today that is perhaps too specific and complex for us to address properly, you might be better off calling the helpline to get that one-to-one assistance. And finally, I want to flag our wellbeing helpline for our members in the UK and Ireland. With award-winning workplace wellbeing provider Health Assured, we're now providing CIPD members with free help and support via sessions with qualified therapists online and over the phone. So remember to look after yourselves. It is a strange and turbulent time. So do remember to put your own oxygen mask on first. So on with the session. As I alluded to at the start, the sheer amount of news has been a little bit overwhelming lately. New government policy interventions have been announced, then postponed, with previously used schemes coming back, like furlough. Following the recent announcement of a second national lockdown, the job retention scheme, which was originally set to close on the 31st of October, has been extended initially until December, and we've just found out in the last 10 minutes, now until March. An estimated 1.2 million employers have furloughed 9.6 million jobs to date. And when we started planning this webinar, we were expecting the new wage assistance scheme, the job support scheme, to be available to organisations from December. However, now we are not quite sure what that looks like. So never say that we are not timely and do not have our finger on the pulse, because we are literally doing this in the moment, and we have people watching the news and putting stuff into the chat. So hopefully we can update as we go. Alongside these job protection measures, the government have also introduced the Kickstart scheme and the Lifetime Skills Guarantee, and those are in an effort to boost job creation and support the recovery of the UK economy. So what do we actually know? What do we not know? What do employers and people professionals need to consider in the light of the latest government guidance? And what are the options for your organisations and your people? Ben and Andrew are going to take us through it. Ben is going to give us an overview of the various schemes and also offer the CIPD viewpoint, and then Andrew will go into the legal aspects in a bit more detail. And then we're going to take your questions. Can I encourage you to get your questions in throughout? please do that rather than wait until the end, because we might wrap up rather than take them. So put them in as soon as you think of them. That is it from me for now. I'm going to hand over to Ben to kick us off. Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, definitely having to stay quite agile at the moment. The pace of change on policy announcements is just astonishing. But we'll try and give you a bit of a sort of stock take of where we are, given the sort of with the caveat around, this is a moving picture. But I'll start with just providing just a bit of context around the sort of labour market, if that's okay. So this is taken from the most recent ONS labour market statistics published in October. And the challenge with these statistics is that they do lag quite a lot. So as you'll see, the most recent data only covers the period between June and the end of August. And what that shows is that we're seeing a dip in employment to 75%, which is still a high level by historic standards, and unemployment ticking up to 4.5%. But obviously, as I said, that is significantly lagging. But we're lucky that today the Bank of England published its new forecasts. Next slide, please. And what this shows is the Bank of England's forecast around GDP, inflation, and the unemployment rate for over the next 3 years. And so if we take GDP to start with, you'll see that if we look at the first column, which is this quarter, so the quarter to the end of December in 2020, they have downgraded their GDP year-on-year forecast to minus 11%, compared to their previous forecasts of minus 5.4%. And I think that's because of the second wave of the pandemic is having a significant negative impact on economic activity, and so the bank is reflecting that in its projections. If we look at over the next its next projections over 2021 to 2023, this time next year, Q4 next year, it's anticipating that GDP will be growing at 11% year on year by Q4 2021. So the economic recovery cycle will have been delayed. So we'll actually be growing faster this time this year than it was expecting. And then if we look ahead, growth in 2022 at 3%, and then falling to 1.6% in 2023 Q4, which is, and 1.6% is broadly the sort of growth levels that we had before the pandemic. If we look at unemployment, you'll see that it has the Bank of England has actually reduced its estimate on the unemployment rate for this quarter to 6.3%. You remember that the ONS data was showing an unemployment level at 4.5%, but that was until the end of August. So I think what it's the Bank of England, and it says this in the report, it's now factoring in it was factoring in the fact that the furlough scheme had been extended until the until December the 2nd then, and the fact that the job support scheme was then in play after that. So its estimate around unemployment had reduced to 6.3%. It now expects unemployment to peak at nearly 8% by the end of June 2020, and then it will fall, it's believed, to 6.7% this time next year, and then the following year down to about just under 5%, and then back to 4.3% in 2023. So that's the Bank of England's best guess, although no doubt their estimations on the labour market will now have to change. But now we're seeing furlough extended until March, from the initial analysis of the Chancellor's statement. So anyway, that's a quick overview of where we are from an economic and labour market perspective. So, and this slide is really a summary of the story around job support measures introduced by government. So initially, if you remember back to the summer, the government, in its jobs plan, said that the furlough scheme would not be extended beyond the end of October, and introduced the job retention bonus. Now, that is a bonus of £1,000 for anyone, any employee who has been returned from furlough and was still in employment by the end of January. Now, I think we understand that job retention bonus is now being withdrawn, but we'll have to double check that. We then had quite late, well, in October, the news that there was going to be a part-time job support scheme, but which would start beginning of November, when the furlough scheme was the original furlough scheme was supposed to end. That was axed, that was withdrawn before we even had the guidance on that. And the government then brought in its job support scheme open, which, and Andrew will I think touch on that in his slides. And we also had the job support scheme closed, which was for those businesses in regions where which were in lockdown and business had been forced to close. Obviously, the announcement of the new lockdown in England at the beginning of this week, or end of last week, has led the government to extend the furlough scheme. Initially, the furlough scheme was due to be extended until the 2nd of December. Just now, we've heard that it's now being extended until the end of March. Now, it is a very, very confusing picture. I'm not quite sure yet. I think we're assuming that the job support schemes will not be operating concurrently with the extended furlough scheme, which I think would be a relief for everyone. But we'll just need to see the detail on that. But I think what we do need is certainty, more consistency from government looking ahead to the springtime, because yes, we don't have a crystal ball, but we do know that there's going to be very turbulent and very uncertain conditions until spring. And if we can get through to spring, and when the weather starts getting better, then hopefully we get through the second wave, then hopefully the economy can start to open up again. And I think we can review the furlough scheme again at that point. But we shall have to reflect, and of course, as Katie said, CIPD will have all the information and implications for HR on our hub as soon as we can. Next slide, please. This was an estimate of the number of people who were expected to be furloughed during November, when we had the initial extension to December the 2nd. So the Institute for Employment Studies estimated that about 5.5 million people will be furloughed during this month. Obviously, we'll also be looking at predictions for what will be the likely trajectory of people in furlough over the winter. Now we have news that it is being extended. That compares with, as Katie said, we had about 9 million furloughed at one point over the summer. Next slide, please. I said I probably won't dwell on this. This is when we were had more. We were thinking about what would happen beyond December the 2nd. As I said, let's just hope that we will have certainty and a commitment that for furlough until springtime. Next slide, please. Of course, no matter what the Chancellor does, jobs will be lost, and lots of businesses will have to go through restructuring, and so there absolutely needs to be an equal focus on skills policy and training and reskilling for the post-pandemic economy. And government has announced a number of initiatives to try and help equip people with the skills to find employment in the post-pandemic economy, and also to help particularly young people who we know will be disadvantaged, particularly. In the plan for jobs in the summer, the government announced its Kickstart scheme for 16 to 24-year-olds. This is provides £1,500 plus, but per Kickstart individual place, plus wage funding for 6 months at the national minimum or national living wage for 25 hours a week. So a very significant initiative. We've got a report coming out on that next month sometime, and also businesses to be given £2,000 for each new apprentice they hire under the age of 25, again to try and boost the proportion of apprenticeships going to young people. Significant investment to triple the scale of traineeships, and also again a big investment to double the number of Department for Work and Pensions work coaches who provide more bespoke support to job seekers to find employment. And we work very closely with the DWP through our Steps Ahead mentoring scheme. So we partner with DWP and Job Centre Plus, who refer job seekers to our Steps Ahead mentors, and we're working closely with DWP on that initiative. Next slide, please. The government has also increased investment to improve access to the National Careers Service for 250,000 young people. I think we need a significant further investment in the National Careers Service, because of course it's not just young people who need more advice and support. It's lots of people who are losing jobs across the age range. The government also announced its lifetime skills guarantee. So from April, adults without an A-level will be able to have a fully funded college course, but not until April. But certainly that is a welcome initiative. And we are expecting a white paper on further education reform to be published before Christmas. And a significant issue there is the sort of the £1.4 billion of funding on further education that we lost following the financial crisis during austerity. And so we absolutely need to see that investment and more come back into FE. And some thoughts around, how can we improve the level of employer engagement with further education colleges at a local and regional level. So we'll be working very closely on that agenda. Next slide, please. But I think what we feel that CIPD feels, although these announcements are welcome, there is a gap in that there is still a lack of immediate investment in training support. So I think there is a real case to push for more flexibility in the apprenticeship levy, so firms in England can use their funds for other forms of accredited training and skills development. And we've got recent survey data which shows that if that did happen, then employers would be using their levy funding for training staff to redeploy to other parts of the business. They use funding for training staff who are working reduced hours, for example, on the furlough scheme, or those staff who are being made redundant to help them develop the skills so that they can find new work. So I think even if there is only temporarily more flexibility to apprenticeship levy, there is a real case for that to happen over the next few months. We also feel that there needs to be a fund to boost training within small and medium-sized businesses who are using the furlough scheme or the job support scheme to train staff on working reduced hours. And more broadly, we think there needs to be a significant extra investment in funding bespoke sector-based training and employability support for up to 250,000 workers who are made redundant. This is based on this costing, and this initiative is based on an initiative in the US called the Work Advance Model, which has been very effectively positively evaluated. So that's something which we have called for in our recent spending review submission to government. Next slide, please. And just a bit of a heads up on some research and papers we've got coming out. Just a reminder of a paper we published on apprenticeship reform in the summer. We continue to lobby the Department for Education and the Department for Work and Pensions on the importance of the development of soft or essential skills as well as technical skills through work we've been doing with the Essential Skills Task Force and the development of the Skills Building Universal Framework. And we've got 2 papers coming up on digital learning and a discussion paper on individual learning accounts. Hopefully we will be disseminating them and highlighting them as and when they're published. That's it for me for the moment, but very happy to take questions in the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Ben, for providing what clarity you are able to there. I'm just going to give an update, which one of my colleagues has sent to me just from a BBC News article, saying that the Chancellor has confirmed that he will extend the furlough scheme until the end of March. He said the scheme will pay up to 80% of a person's wages, up to £2,500 a month, and then that policy is due to be reviewed in January. So I guess we have some certainty of some sort until January. Thank you for your questions so far. Please do keep them coming in, and I'll put them to Ben and Andrew after Andrew has run us through a quick legal update. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Katie. Hello, everybody. Yeah, looking at the legal implications of what's been announced regarding these latest schemes. If you could bring up the next slide. Thank you. So the intention was to look at both the furlough scheme, the job retention scheme, which 2 days ago we thought would run out beginning of December to be replaced by the JSS. So the plan was to run you through both the job retention scheme and the JSS. There's probably not too much to say about the JSS now, given this morning's announcement that this scheme that we're looking at now, the furlough scheme, has now been extended until March. Rather than early December, as we thought when we were preparing the session. So talking through this scheme and what we know about it, first thing to say is it is subject to further detailed guidance and legislation. So a lot of what we're saying about this scheme at the moment is based on our knowledge of the way the previous scheme operated, and just the obvious things that needed updating around this version of the scheme have been announced so far around launch dates and qualification dates and the like. So I'll run through those. But some of the information I'm about to give you is more based on our knowledge of the way the scheme has operated previously, and we are waiting for further guidance. The first thing just to clear up is that there's no gap between the scheme that was in place until the end of October and the scheme that's taken effect in November. Obviously, lockdown has only occurred today, so that raised a slight issue around, well, when does the new furlough scheme operate from, and is there a gap? There isn't a gap. It's been clarified that there's no gap in eligibility at all between the previous announced end date of 31st of October and this extension period, and we can assume that applies to the extended period, which ends in March. As I say, we are awaiting full details, but we do know that essentially employers can continue either on full or flexible furlough. That is, they can be furloughed for all of their working time, or in accordance with the flexible furlough scheme, they may just work some of their hours and then be furloughed for the remainder of their hours. Regarding the scheme that essentially took effect from the 1st of November, employees must have been on the PAYE payroll of their employer and have been the subject of a real-time information submission before the 30th of October. More specifically, between the 20th of March and the 30th of October. And there was no need for the employers to have been enrolled on the scheme before. So essentially, in that sense, this is a new scheme. You can disregard what's gone before in terms of those employees that qualify. Now, employees must have been on the payroll and subject to an RTR submission on or before the 30th of October. As before, rehires are allowed. So you can bring back somebody who's been made redundant previously and bring them back and put them on this scheme, provided they were on the payroll on the 23rd of September. And that means, again, notified to HMRC on a real-time information submission on or before that date. Now, this was possible before, it's possible again. I've noticed already there's a question around that that's been submitted. We discussed that at length last time, and the concern around rehires would be, what does that mean in terms of continuity of employment? If you've consulted with somebody around redundancy, do you have to restart consultation? If you take them back, probably you do, because probably you're bringing people back and reinstating them. In other words, it's as if the first dismissal didn't happen. So you have to start again, really, in terms of consulting. And also the clock isn't reset in terms of continuity. They can add their previous service. So bringing them back may take them over 2 years, for example, and give them unfair dismissal rights that they wouldn't otherwise have had. So it's something to seriously consider before you do it, that all those complications can arise. And we may touch on that a little bit more when we come to questions. Excuse me, I'll just take a drink. If you can put the next slide up, Danielle, thank you. Okay, so I've picked out the essential elements of the scheme from employers' point of view. And the first one remains the need for agreement. So you still need to ensure that you agree with your employees that they will be furloughed. Your agreement needs to set out the change in their working hours and confirm any reduction in pay if there is one. Some employers still top up, but you don't have to. And also make it clear that employees have to cease all work during furloughed hours. Essentially, this is a change to terms and conditions, so you do need that agreement, and it does need to be recorded in writing, and that record kept for 5 years. You may well have agreed with your employees that they were to be placed on the new job support scheme, which has now been set aside. If you've done that, you need to revisit the agreement again almost certainly to ensure that they agree to being furloughed. There shouldn't be a problem around that because they will get more pay under the JRS than they would have got under the JSS, but important to secure that agreement. Next slide, please. Annual leave. Again, we expect the position to remain the same as it was before. So entitlement will continue to accrue during a period of furlough. Annual leave can be taken during furlough, but if it is, salary must be paid 100%, even though employers can only reclaim 80% under the scheme. It is possible for employers to require employees to require annual leave to be taken. That's got to be in accordance with any contractual provisions, or if not, the working time regs. This happened last time, Katie. I'm sorry about the coughing. Very ironic given the subject matter, but there we go. So just bear with me. Sorry, everybody. And then flexible furlough. Again, we're assuming that any annual leave taken during working hours will be treated as unworked time and therefore count to the time for which, towards the time for which wages can be claimed. Notice pay, that could be reclaimed under the old version of the scheme, and we expect the same will apply here, provided the employee is seeing out the period of notice. So a pile-on, a payment in lieu, wouldn't be recoverable, but we expect that a payment for notice will be. Next slide, please. Okay, so it's probably not sensible to spend too much time on the JSS. There were to be two versions in operation from the 1st of November, the open scheme and the closed scheme. When we first saw the press reports this morning about furlough for possible extensions to the scheme, we thought that would just apply in respect of any tier 3 lockdowns. So in other words, it would have away with the closed version of the scheme, but the open version of the scheme we thought would remain open and available. But given what's just been announced, this scheme won't operate until March at the absolute earliest and may never operate. So it's probably not sensible to spend a great deal of time on that now, Katie.
Do you want to move on to the next slide?
And we can cover the slides briefly, but the detail, as I say, isn't probably worth spending time on. So probably best to jump to.
Yeah. Well, these slides will be available to download. So if anybody really wants to learn about the features of a scheme that no longer exist, they can teach they can teach themselves. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that, and I hope we don't need to get you a test. It's not a good time to be coughing.
Me too.
Right, I'm gonna take your questions now. Thank you for putting those in. And I will take the ones on redundancy first, because we've got quite a few of them, Andrew, and I know you did address this. But first one here, what should we do with employees that were made redundant on the 31st of October? Can they be brought back and put on extended furlough? What happens with notice period? And then someone else has also asked, if we bring people back, what about redundancy pay? If they got a package to leave, what do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, taking that first question first, you can bring them back, that's been clarified. But as I mentioned in the presentation, whether it's sensible to do that, given the complications that can arise with having to recommence consultation and perhaps take into account longer length of service, it's something to consider carefully before you do it. But it's been made clear that provided somebody was on the payroll on 23rd September and the subject of a real-time information submission on or before that date, they can be brought back. As regards notice periods, again, if you bring somebody back, the expectation is you'll bring them back as if the redundancy didn't occur. So they'll be reinstated to their old position, the dismissal will disappear essentially. And so to effect any new redundancy, you'd have to start from scratch, both in terms of consultation and any notice required. As regards redundancy pay, really that's something you need to agree with employees if you bring them back. So you might agree that they repay that as part of any offer to return, because certainly at the point at which you contact them and run through that with them, they are dismissed, they were dismissed for redundancy, and they were entitled to that payment. So something for negotiation between the parties if you do rehire.
Mm-hmm. And Ben, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on rehiring people. Obviously, it's pretty complex for HR professionals.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if if you're, if the scheme allows you to do, and it makes sense for the the organisation and the individual, then probably, why not? I think it's just down to individual discussions and understanding the the sort of the value for both parties.
Thank you. Andrew, can you clarify what the situation is with issuing notice of redundancies now that the JRS has been extended? As to my understanding, questioner, there were different rules regarding redundancies under the JSS. Yeah,
that's right. Under the JSS terms as proposed, it wasn't possible to claim for any employees who were being made redundant in the claim period or were under notice of redundancy in the claim period. That wasn't the same under the furlough scheme, and we don't expect it to be the same this time. So we believe it will be possible to claim notice pay for people being made redundant during a furlough period, provided they see out that period of notice rather than being paid in lieu. So in a sense, that's more, a more generous position for employers to be in under the furlough scheme than they would have been in, it seems, under the JSS, where it was made clear that you could not claim for employees who have been made redundant in that period or under notice of redundancy. So that's the difference. I think we revert to Plan A and under furlough.
A question, Ben, I think this is about the Kickstarter scheme. Do you know when the £2,000 per apprentice under 25 years old is due to come into effect and how people can claim that?
It's in force. I mean, it's live now, and you have to if you go to gov. You can create your own account online and then make a claim, and you get 50% of the money after 90 days, and the outstanding amount after the apprentice has completed 1 year. But it looks quite a straightforward system.
Do you know what the take-up's been like on that? So it's one of those that hasn't had that much coverage, really.
Well, we should have some data back, actually. We've got a report coming out probably in December, which is data from our Labour Market Outlook survey, where we've asked questions. I think we've got responses from 1,000 employers on take up around Kickstart, and also the incentives for apprentices and other elements of the jobs plan announced in the summer. So we should have a better idea of how effective that has been. Next month.
Thank you. Andrew, I know when we were doing all our previous kind of how many webinars we did on furlough, we had a lot of questions about getting consent and agreement. So if we are putting people back on furlough, do you need to gain fresh agreement? If their original agreement letters ended on the 31st, you need to do it again?
Yeah, I think it's sensible to do that. I mean, we talked at the time about doing open-ended agreements, so covering a period whereby somebody would agree to be furloughed until further notice, and you obviously discuss with them regularly and keep them updated. But I think in most cases, people agreed fixed periods, and I think also there'd be a reasonable expectation on both sides that furlough would have ended by now. So I think it's sensible to enter into a new agreement now for any further period of furlough, whether somebody's been furloughed before or not. Basically start again and secure further agreement from here.
Okay. Ben, another question on the Kickstart scheme. Could you clarify if the Kickstart scheme gives employers the freedom to select its people under the scheme? So how much kind of freedom is there to choose who gets it, who you put on it?
Yeah, I mean, there's still an element of freedom. I think you have to be comfortable with the people you're bringing into the organisation. So there's still a process of selection.
Thank you. And this probably, I don't know if we'll have the answer to this, but I review. Any idea when we are likely to see new applications for the JRS open up? Will it be pretty soon? Do you think they'll do a lot of changes? Andrew?
I don't think we know yet, but I think the information we had on that was that the government expected employers to pay and seek reimbursement initially while the new version of the scheme was being set up, but that they expected to be in a position fairly shortly to pay in advance as they had before. And that was when the scheme was only intended to run for a month. So I think we can expect the new application period to be open before the end of November.
Mm-hmm. Ben, does that sound about right to you?
Yes, no, absolutely.
Thank you. And then got a few kind of quite technical questions around it's all about is what can we expect to be the same in the new furlough scheme versus what was. So will compulsory commission be included in the extension as it was originally? I guess the question there is how much change do you expect to be built into it, or is it just going to be dragging and dropping what we had before?
Well, we are subject to further guidance, but as I say, there's no reason to think anything will change regarding what's recoverable under the scheme. So if commission's contractual and paid on that basis, then you would expect to be able to recover that up to the cap.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Somebody else asked, am I right in understanding that the extended scheme is based on 80% of current salary and not based on salary as it was at 28th February as it was previously, i.e. if there was a pay increase after the 28th of February but before the 23rd of September, it will be 80% of the new salary? Andrew?
Again, we're awaiting detailed guidance on the reference periods for pay, because there will be some people who've been furloughed throughout, and so to base their furlough pay on what they've been receiving won't do them any favours. So I think we may still need to refer back to pay rates prior to the introduction of this scheme, but I think all we can safely say is assume nothing's changed unless we hear to the contrary when the new guidance is issued.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for that reason already sort of outlined there, I think it's unlikely we'll go back to a more recent period, because I think so many people will be affected by the fact they have been on furlough or short time working.
Thank you. I just want to flag that I'll probably wrap this up slightly earlier than usual, given that we only had 2 speakers. So if you do want a question answered, I would advise you to put it in the next 2 to 5 minutes, so I can take it. A question here, Ben, I think this is about the job retention bonus. So do we know what will happen with the payment that was due? If staff were employed at the end of January, so that is the job retention bonus. Ben, have we got that's being scrapped?
I mean, my understanding is that is being withdrawn now, because I think the criteria probably don't really apply anymore if furloughs being extended. So I think we can assume that need to read the statement, but that's my understanding. But I've been slightly in limbo because of the webinar. But that's my understanding.
Yeah, and Andrew, is that I think that's my understanding from.
Yes, mine as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so that will be scrapped, maybe bought in at a later date. Who knows? Andrew, are there risks for an employer if furloughed staff are asked to do volunteer work for the business, such as marketing work? I believe this came up quite a lot in the last sessions as well.
Yeah, I just don't think you can be providing any services to an employer who's reclaiming salary under the scheme. So that will be a no for me. They can do voluntary work elsewhere, but not for their own employer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ben, do you have any insight on if the government has allocated any extra funding for employers to support employees' mental health and well-being? Because obviously that's going to be a really big concern as we go into those short, dark days.
No, I don't think that is an area that the government has made any announcements on. I mean, I think the key issue would be access to talking therapies, and we know that's an area where there's a shortfall. Depends on the sort of the level of provision at a local level. So there is a real need for more funded support for early access to talking therapies, but there's nothing that's been announced
I suppose on the other area that we're pushing strongly on is the need to increase statutory sick pay. But again, that's something which we there've been some minor tweaks, but overall the level of statutory sick pay is very low in the UK compared to international standards.
Have you got any advice on what employers can do in this area, or how they can step up if there's not extra support available?
I mean, I think the key thing is I think really it's if we're going to highlight one area, it's how line managers support their staff and making sure that line managers have the access to training information and guidance to manage people properly. So the key soft skills around empathy, listening, providing flexibility and support, really important at all times, but particularly now, and particularly if people working remotely, or people are still in the workplace and have a lot of anxiety. So and I think early access to, if you have an occupational health service, then early access to occupational health if people are struggling for whatever reason.
And I think we had a stat that was in one of our kind of employer research pieces or employee research pieces that quite a shocking number of people hadn't had a single meeting or chat with their line manager about their well-being since the beginning of the pandemic. So I think that those kind of soft skills are so important. A few more kind of technical furlough ones for you, Andrew. I believe you said this originally, but can you add employees who are not on the original list of furloughed staff?
Yes, you can, provided they're on the payroll on or before 30th October, they qualify for this scheme, even if they haven't been furloughed before.
Okay. And on the rehires bit, I believe this question is asking about what the kind of difference, if somebody's resigned, can you rehire them back?
Yeah, I mean, looking at that question, I mean, it seems to suggest that somebody's working out a period of notice prior to leaving as a result of their resignation. I mean, it's perfectly possible for the two sides to agree that a resignation be withdrawn and somebody carry on in employment, and that's the case regardless of this scheme. So I don't see an issue there, as long as it works for the employer as well as the employee, because once a resignation has been submitted and accepted, and as long as it wasn't done in a constructive dismissal type situation or in the heat of the moment, once that's the position, then there's no requirement on an employer to accept a withdrawal of resignation. But if it works for both parties, as Ben said earlier, then I think it's fine.
And somebody's just putting about if somebody's taking voluntary redundancy, I assume same
yeah, same answer really. Yeah, no requirement. Once it's all agreed and set in place, no need to withdraw from that. But if it works for the parties, that's fine.
If employees were furloughed and then got part-time work elsewhere, can you still claim furlough for them moving forward?
That was the position under the old scheme, and we've seen nothing to suggest it will change this time. So yeah, it's the sort of the business that's claiming that cannot have them do any work, provide any services. But if they can find something else on a temporary basis elsewhere in the meantime, subject to your normal rules around allowing second employment, and again, it's got to work for you as a business. But if it does, you would expect that would be allowed because it was before.
And if you have an employee who's at risk of redundancy, can you claim the furlough payments between now and the end of the notice period? Do we know
under furlough, you can, provided they are working out that notice, in inverted commas. Obviously, they won't be working, but as long as they see out that notice period, then you should be able to reclaim that money. It's payments in lieu that you can't reclaim.
And somebody's just asked in the chat, but I'll pick it up, that they've launched their annual staff survey, which is open for 3 weeks. Can we reasonably ask staff to complete it and give feedback on how they're experiencing work if they're on furlough? Does that count as work, or is that okay? Is that reasonable, Andrew?
There's no specific guidance on that either way. My sense would be that really is part of staying in touch with your employees, talking to your employees. And on that basis, I would expect HMRC to be happy with that.
And have you got any guidance for employees on annualised hours contracts where we're not able to fulfil the hours? How do we claim furlough for them?
I think that falls back on the provisions around those on irregular hours or irregular pay. So you refer back to the reference period in the previous year, or if it's more generous to them, the average pay across the year, and work the amount that can be reclaimed out on that basis.
Mm-hmm. And the last question we got here, someone said they're not sure if this is a correct forum, but I will ask it anyway because I think it is a good question, that they have staff that are not eligible for universal credit or JSA due to redundancy payment being over 16,000. Ben, do you know, is there any support available to people who've fallen between the gaps? There's quite a lot of people, I think, who have fallen between various schemes.
I mean, I think, you know, the Chancellor, you know, has left some gaps, and I think it's, you know, it's been quite difficult to, you know, for government to address every circumstance. So I'm not aware of anything in particular outside the you know, the sort of the existing you know, benefits that's in play for everybody.
And have you got any thoughts on, I think this is something we did cover in our webinar on redundancies a few weeks ago, but on any kind of assistance, obviously not potentially monetary, that an employer can provide. So is it around system, kind of access to EAPs perhaps, if somebody's been made redundant, having access to that a bit longer than you might do normally?
I mean, I think you know, the wider question around, you know, how do you support staff who are you know, being made redundant, you know, whether it is, you know, can you provide you know, training, you know, what support can you provide in terms of, you know, mental health or well-being or financial advice. You know, I think you know, those are the sorts of things that employers should really be looking to do.
Thank you. I'm going to wrap up there because I think this is actually a record and perhaps the first time on a webinar where I've asked every single question, so nobody is allowed to get annoyed with me for missing any. Thank you so much to Ben and Andrew for providing your insight and clarity where we could there. Obviously, as Ben said, we're having to be pretty agile about stuff, and I know that all of you are as well, and that I'm sure people who spent last kind of couple of weeks trying to get to grips with the JSS and now tearing their hair out, that was wasted time and resource, but hopefully this was a helpful session for you. Just to let you know that next week we aren't having a webinar because it's actually the CIPD annual conference, and I hope that we will see some of you there, but we'll be back the week after where we've got a session on supporting financial well-being in the run-up to Christmas. And as I said at the start, please do remember the CIPD Coronavirus Hub. We're updating it all the time, and as soon as we have more information on the what the extension to the furlough scheme means, that content will be updated and you'll be able to find it there. So thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your questions, and we will see you another time. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.